For some context, my mother has COPD and she normally has to use a wheelchair to get around. This happened after a bad flare-up, but it still affects the story a little. Because my mom has COPD, whenever we need to make a quick run to the store, she normally sends me in. It was an average day, or so I thought, and I'd just been to the gym, so I was wearing yoga pants and a gray tank top that said, "Working out because punching people was frowned upon." As I'm walking around those aisles gathering her list of items with one of those green shopping baskets, I notice a guy come down the opposite way while waving at me and smiling. I live in a southern state, so this isn't considered odd at all, and I oftentimes wave back and ask them how they're doing. I smile and wave back. Now, this guy looked to be in his 30s or 40s, and he obviously hadn't shaved in over a week. Other than that, there were no red flags as far as appearances go. Anyway, I end up leaving the aisle and walk over to the next one and head in. Not even 5 seconds later, I see the same man come from the opposite way. It wasn't until now when I noticed that he didn't have a cart, and I didn't see anything in his hands. That's when red flags started going off. I just thought to myself that I was overreacting and that maybe he just went down the wrong aisle, as I tend to do that a lot too. Being a paranoid person and still a bit worried, I try my best not to make any eye contact with him and grab what I need and hurry to the next aisle pretending that I'm in a rush. I go down another aisle and bam, there he is again with nothing in his hands. By this point, I have everything I need, but I was genuinely afraid to leave. This guy has nothing in his hands, and if he's not checking out, what's stopping him from following me out? All the while, I'm telling myself that I'm overreacting and decided to prove it to myself. I go over to another section of the store where they have a display of nuts, gluten-free candies, and other weird snack items like banana chips. I walk around like I'm about to head into another aisle and stop at the end of the shelves, watching. Each time he had come into an aisle, he had come through the opposite sides, and sure enough, he comes walking down the aisle. I quickly shuffle around with my basket and act like I'm looking at the candies. The thing I didn't count on was him not seeing me. I don't know if it was because I'm very short or because he just did a quick glance and was just confused that I had disappeared. He quickly turned around and headed out of the aisle. Now, alarms start going off in my head. My original plan was to basically hide behind the shelves until he left, but I then hear someone call my name. I turn around and see my mom and niece at the checkout line, and my mom is leaning against one of those displays with various houseplants that they seasonally have. She's out of breath. I wanted to tell her about the man that was following me, but she seemed worked up about something else, so I decided to wait until I found out what was going on. As we were checking out, I see the guy walk up. He didn't naturally seem to care that I was with someone, and he didn't even hesitate as he grabbed a candy bar and got into the line right next to us. At this point, I don't know what to do. I'm quickly putting my stuff on the belt to try and hurry. Thankfully, this little old lady that was in front of the other guy had her cart filled to the brim. It gave me enough time to collect everything for us and get out of there. When we got into the car, my mom shocked me with what she said. "Did you see that man?" Yeah, I did. Did you see him?" I explained that I had seen him and that he was following me around the store. My mom lost it and started cussing like a sailor. And before we even pulled out of the parking lot, she had my dad on the phone, demanding him to drive her away in case the man would follow us. We lived just down the road, and we had actually passed my dad in less than 5 minutes. I asked my mom what made her come into the store, and what she said chilled me to the bone. She said that the guy was actually coming out of the store as I was going in, but stopped when I passed him. He turned his head around and made it very obvious that he was looking at my, sitting cushions, and hurried back to his car only to follow me back in. I don't want to think of how things could have gone much worse if I hadn't noticed him turning up in every aisle, or if my mom hadn't noticed his behavior, or if he had managed to check out at the exact same time as us and meet us at the exit. My husband was almost abducted. I think about this moment when he and I get into a disagreement and I immediately stop being mad at him. The idea that I almost lost him and never would have known what had happened is enough to calm even my most justified anger. This happened about 3 years ago. I was 24 and he was 25. It had pretty much been just me and him since we were 17 and 18, so my whole world was almost snatched away. It was late at night. I had just picked him up from work and we stopped at a Harris Teeter for a bottle of wine and pizza. I had both of our cell phones in my purse because that's just how we did it when we were out together. And for some reason, he didn't like having it in his back pocket. Also, my husband is very pretty. I mean, he's handsome, but he's got long curly black hair and a slight build. And we both look way younger than we are. So we're in line, about to pay, when he realizes he left his wallet in the car. The store is pretty much empty and there was no one behind us, so he said, "I'll be right back," and ran out into the dark parking lot. Now, I'm anxious anyway, so when he was gone for literally 4 minutes, I ran outside to look for him. I saw a black truck with a trunk cover on it, driving away under the single street light, and my husband was nowhere in sight. I ran to our car, praying he was in there. Thank God he was. He was sitting in our locked car, staring at the truck until I too loudly smacked the passenger window. He looked at me with giant terrified eyes. "Get in." He leaned over and unlocked my door and yelled at me to lock it back when I sat down. He was shaking and freaking out and hugging me. I finally just squeezed him and said, "Honey, what the hell happened?" He finally said, "Give me my phone," and dialed 911. I heard the story as he was telling it to the operator, and it still makes me want to throw up whenever I think about it. He had walked out to the car and noticed the black truck a lane over. We both worked in stores in that shopping center and had never been afraid of the parking lot, but luckily it sent up a big red flag. As he fumbled with the keys, no fob, he heard the truck start up and figured it was leaving. In the time it took for him to grab his wallet out of the seat and turn around, the truck was behind him, and a big man had opened the trunk. As the man turned around to face him, my husband just fell back in our car and slammed the door. The man didn't try the door right away. Instead, he hit the window in anger, and that's what saved my husband because he managed in that moment to lock the doors. The man just stood there for a whole minute, looking around and tried opening the door twice. Then he paced for a few seconds, then went back to the front of his truck and dug around. This whole time, my husband sat in horror without his phone. I really wish he thought to honk the horn or something to scare the guy off, but he was too scared to think. Finally, the man just climbed into the cab and sat until I guess he saw me running out of the store and zoomed off. The police arrived and my husband gave a description of the truck and the man. Tall, big, white, balding, and dressed in all black, like a sweatsuit. The truck either didn't have a license plate or he covered it. They didn't find him that we know of, and we've since moved out of the state. So, yeah, that's how my husband was almost kidnapped for what I refused to imagine. I stayed awake for nights just holding him and feeling him breathe. I almost lost him. After the shock wore away, he became rather serious about working out because the fact that he couldn't have been able to fight the man off still haunts him. This happened to me back in 2007. I was 9 years old and my brother was 14. My mom had sent us out of the house with about $30 to go see a movie and maybe get a bite to eat afterwards. After seeing the movie, it was getting pretty dark and I was ready to go home. However, my brother wanted to get something to eat first and we agreed to walk to McDonald's, which was only a couple blocks from the movie theater. On our way there, we were stopped and approached by a man. He had a friendly smile plastered on his face and he was holding his child's hand. At first, there didn't seem to be anything off about this man. He was average looking and seemed to be nothing more than a father having a day out with his son. "Hey, do you two think you could give my son and I a hand real quick?" he asked. "We need help loading a mattress onto the back of our truck. The truck is just up the road." "I'm sorry, but we really don't have time," my brother said. It was at this time I noticed the little boy. He was about 8 years old and he looked abnormally thin. He had a blank expression on his face and wore clothes that were pretty much too big for him. I turned my attention back to the man, who was now mumbling to my brother about how it would only take a second. Once again, my brother kindly declined. Being the helpful kid I was, I joined in with the man and tried to persuade my brother that we should help them out. I turned to my brother, who was now staring down at the little boy. My brother had a disturbed expression on his face as he looked down at the child. The child stared back at my brother blankly. I didn't understand why my brother had that look on his face. He then grabs my hand and says, I think that's my mom over there. We have to go." He pulled me and we began walking away from the man. I didn't understand what was going on and why my brother had just lied about my mom being there. He didn't let go of my hand and practically dragged me until we were a far distance away from the man and his son. I looked back and could still see the man holding his son's hand, only now he wasn't smiling anymore. He had a look of fury on his face and he yanked the little boy's arm and they walked away. I pulled away from my brother's grasp and bombarded him with questions. He shushed me and pulled out his cell phone. He dialed in a number and began pacing around nervously while talking on the phone. I then remembered the police showing up, and my mom came soon after. She then took me home, but my brother was left with the police. I had asked my mother what was going on, and she said that the police were just questioning my brother because the man we had encountered was dangerous. That's all she told me, and I went to bed. By the next morning, I had almost completely forgotten about the incident, and things went back to normal. It wasn't until a few days ago that these memories flooded back into my mind. I decided to call my now 22-year-old brother to get some answers. When I brought the whole ordeal back up to him, he finally gave me the information I wanted to know. And now that I know everything, I understand how terrifying our encounter with the man truly was. My brother told me that while the man was constantly trying to convince us to come with him, he happened to look at the little boy. The little boy then looked at my brother with his eyes filled with terror and mouthed the words, "I'm not his son. Please help me." Then his expression went back to being completely blank, almost as if he had never said anything at all. This was why he had become so freaked out and snatched me away. When he called the police, they hurried down and he described the man the best he could. Unfortunately, they couldn't do much with the very little information my brother had given, because we hadn't seen the card that the man supposedly had. My brother told me that a few weeks into the investigation, they had found the little boy, who was with the man, dead. His body had been cruelly dumped in the woods. The cause of his death was dehydration. If my brother and I had gone with the sicko, we likely would have met the same fate. He obviously couldn't have kidnapped both of us on his own, as my brother was a fairly strong fellow. That meant he had other pedophile partners who would help him snatch up unsuspecting kids. Unfortunately, they were never able to catch any of the sick people who did this to the child, but the man was definitely not his father. His real parents had already been searching for their missing son for almost a month. The pedophiles had managed to kidnap the poor kid and use him as their puppet to try and kidnap other kids. Every time I think about the boy, I feel a deep pity for him. He was only a year younger than I was at the time, and I could only imagine how terrible it must have been to slowly starve to death.